Today we're learning about several different effects in DaVinci Resolve. We're going to learn about lightning, particles, the follower modifier, and even how to create this shatter effect. So stay tuned as I show you the building blocks of how we created the Sonic 4 trailer right here in DaVinci Resolve. So here we are in the edit page of DaVinci Resolve. The very first thing I want to show you guys is a side-by-side of the final result with our reference so you can see the exact likeness of the effect we're going to be recreating. So here we go. Pretty darn cool. And if you couldn't tell, the left one was ours, the right one is the official trailer. All right, let me take you through a super fast run through of exactly what I'm seeing here so that you'll know what we're making as we're making it. You're not lost in the dark. You'll be able to follow along really easily. So we've got our number 4 here that's slamming onto the screen. So we're gonna want to animate our 4 on. We're gonna need a little bit of camera shake as it makes its final impact onto the screen. Then we've got this really cool lightning effect. Then as it gets pushed towards the right side of the screen and all of our other letters come in, we've got some really cool blurring taking place. So we'll have to create some kind of motion blur, some kind of effect for that. Then we also have this really cool kind of duplicate plus faded glow effect. And a really cool thing with the glow, you guys can see, is we have a super bright source on the glow, and then we have basically an instant fall off. It's not like bright and then slowly less bright. It's just bright and then instant dark after. Then we've got lightning going on all of the letters, and to get good looking lightning in DaVinci Resolve, there's a couple specific steps you need to take. Don't worry, I'm going to show you exactly how we do that. And then we have our bottom text kind of rush onto the screen in the same way that our top text does, minus the lightning. And while the entire thing is animating onto the screen, it is slowly zooming out. You can see if I scrub forward and back very fast, you can see the entire title card slowly zooming out. We of course have this really cool smoky background with some particles happening. And then right at the end, the entire screen cracks and then shatters, revealing our final text right here. Some more glowing text, a simpler background, and we also have this burst of particles to go along with the shatter. We're going to be building this piece by piece. Let's start at the beginning. So here is the entire node tree for the effect. I've divided it up this way to make it very easy to see which part is which. The project file will be available on the 4th wall page. I think we're going to give this one away for free. So if you're looking for the project file, it will be linked below in the description. So to kick things off, we are going to create our Sonic text. And when we're looking at the reference, there's a very specific couple details that make this a bit of a challenge to figure out. The first thing, obviously, is the duplicate layers of text that we have. And this is for a few reasons. One is that you can see the glow effect slowly fades off with each consecutive duplicate. And typically when you apply glow to different elements of text, it will apply the same glow effect globally across the entire word. It's not selective how we're seeing it here. The second thing is you'll notice that the duplicates themselves only have kind of the outlines showing behind our main text right here, meaning that anything that would be showing is covered up by the text body, although to us it looks like the text body is more or less just being filled with what's coming off of the glow from the letter shape itself. Something else we need to create is this very subtle lightning effect that takes place on the borders of each letter. And it's only taking place, we'll notice, on the front layer. You can see that behind here, there is no lightning effect. It's just on the front. So we've got our work cut out for us with this deceptively simple looking piece of text here, not to mention the fact that we also have to animate this entire thing on. So let's get started. So we started things off with a simple text plus node. Now the font we're using for today's effect is Rebelton Bold. I will put a link to it in the description below if you want to download. Then we made some adjustments to our size and our tracking. So if I set these both back to normal, you can see we end up with something a lot less desirable. Now you'll notice that our text right here does not look anything like what we have in our reference. And there's a very specific reason for that you're going to see in a couple nodes here. For now, we're going to head over to the shading tab. And today we're going to be using both shading element 1 and shading element 2. Now with shading element 1, you're going to want it enabled, which you probably will have on by default. We brought our color all the way down to black, and then we set our shear to negative 0.3. And that is what gives our text this kind of leaning effect that you see right here. Then in shading element 2, we made sure the text appearance type was on outline, and we changed the text color to be a little bit of a light blue. Then we brought the softness up just a little bit, and then we set our X shear property to the exact same value that we did with our first shading element. Then once we had that set up, it was time to actually animate the text on screen, because as you can see, the text just flies onto the screen. And the most common tool used in DaVinci Resolve for animating letters one by one like this is the follower modifier. Now, in order to add the follower modifier onto our text, I'm simply going to go into our text box right here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to click on follower right here. And you'll notice as soon as you add the follower modifier onto your text, you're going to see this modifiers tab light up right here. If we click on that, now we've got a whole bunch of similar looking tabs that we can play with, and one new tab called timing. Now, because we have our letters animating on one by one, this timing tab is what's going to control how much of a delay there is either between each character or between the first and last character, or if you set your settings to random, then how much just each letter is going to animate. Now for us, there's two things we actually want to change. The first one is our transform property. This is what is going to control the actual movement of our letters. And so you can see right here, we've set up one keyframe and we've dragged our offset to actually move our text. And you can see I've straight up just moved it right off screen. And then we've moved over a few frames and I've set another keyframe where I've moved our first letter back onto the screen. And the reason we have this kind of weird spacing in between the letters is because of our timing tab. And you can see we've also added a keyframe at the same spot where we've added a keyframe for our transform. So you can see I've got a keyframe on our delay here and I've set it to 2. I have a keyframe on the exact same frame for the transform. And all I've done is, after setting our delay to 2 and watching as our text slowly moved onto the screen, I decided I wanted each letter to take a little bit longer to animate onto the screen. So I let it move over a few frames and then I changed our delay to 3. And you can see that when this plays and animates onto the screen, we end up with something like this, which ends up coming out pretty good. Now we of course have smoothed out our keyframe animations so that they're not linear and looking very kind of stiff and wooden. And the way that we've adjusted these keyframes is by going into the spline editor of our Text Plus node. Let me just pop out this window here so you can see this a lot easier. And you can see we have the two different curves for our animation. The first one on the top here is our actual X offset. And you can see I'm letting this start off more or less linear. And then we're smoothing it out at the top by just dragging a box over our keyframe. And then we can click and drag on this handle here to actually adjust the smoothness of the animation. And then I've done the exact same thing with the delay here. If I drag this up to be more stretched out, you can see the delay has more or less the same effect, where it's starting off pretty linear and then close to the end, it smooths right on out. And that is what gives us this result right here, where each letter moves in very, very fast and then eases up as it reaches the end of its animated path. Now that we have our text set up with the kind of look we're going after and we have it animated, it's time to add on our duplicates. And the way we're going to do that is with a duplicate node. The way you can add a duplicate node onto your screen is by hitting Shift spacebar and just typing in duplicate. And you're going to hit this one right here with the plus button. Then we're going to plug our main text into the background, which is the yellow input of our duplicate node. And if we just drag the duplicate node onto our viewer, instantly we can see we now have our duplicate text just like in our reference here. But it didn't start out like this. The duplicate originally starts out like this, with more or less no visual changes. Now, the amount of copies of our text that we want is 4 because that is what we have in our reference. So what we did is with our duplicate selected in the inspector here, we set our copies to 4. After that, we took our center control and we just clicked and dragged on the X to actually adjust the position of our text. This is how you get that really cool offset effect that we have, just like in our reference. Then in our operator mode, we changed it from over, which typically will give us this result here, which you don't want, to under, so that our copies are underneath of the original. One other effect we changed in order to get this faded effect right here, because remember, with our glow, we're going to want our glow to kind of fade off with each iteration of our text. We took our subtractive additive property and we just dragged it all the way down from additive to subtractive. Then additionally in our blend, we took our blend controls and we just pulled them down a little bit. And if we pull our blend all the way down, we lose all of our copies, and the more that we pull our blend up, the more the closest copy will be visible to us. If we have our blend all the way set to 1, every single copy is going to be completely visible. Then, because we only want the outlines of these copies, we're going to plug our duplicate into a luma keyer. And the luma keyer you can get as well by simply typing in luma keyer in your toolbar and then adding it into your Fusion composition. And now when we plug our duplicate into our luma keyer, something really, really cool happens. Let's drag this into our viewer. You'll see we've gotten rid of the black parts of our text completely, but we have kept the light blue parts. And this is the reason that we had the original black body of our text in the first place. Because if I go into my text plus node and I go to shading and I uncheck shading element 1, we end up with something like this. And that is because all we have is the outline. So when we duplicate and then we add our luma keyer, there's nothing to block the text borders behind our original text. So that is why we have the original black body of our text, why we use the duplicate in the way we do, and why we have our luma keyer. Now it's time to add the glow effect for our main text. And this one was quite the challenge, specifically because of the type of glow that we have for our text effect, where it is very, very bright at the source and then instantly falls off as soon as we move away from our text border. And the way we did this was with a glow node. You can get the glow by, again, hitting Shift Spacebar on your keyboard and typing in glow on your keyboard. You're going to hit this top one right here. Then we plugged our luma key into the yellow input of our glow node. If we put that into our viewer, this is what we ended up with. Now, the settings we changed for our glow node to get this result was we turned off our red and our alpha color. The reason we did this was, as you can see, to get a little bit more of a green-blue look for our color. Then we adjusted our glow size, the actual glow amount, and our glow blend to achieve this result. Normally, your glow is going to start off something like this, and then you'll have to kind of play around with it until you get something similar. After that, we plugged the entire thing into a soft glow, and you'll see that our soft glow really takes the whole thing and just completely blows it out. And this is actually exactly how I want the entire thing set up, because we're going to take the output of our luma keyer and we're going to plug it into both the background and the mask node of our soft glow. And this is what is going to give us this super, super bright source glow while allowing us to keep our instant fall off effect. And you'll notice as well that with the soft glow, we have both the red and the alpha checked. All of our colors are on for this one. Then we plug that into one more soft glow. We adjust our settings a little bit so that we can get an overall kind of glowy aura for our text effect. And you'll see we're still keeping this super, super bright initial glow. And once we throw this on top of a background, it's going to look really, really good. Now, this is looking pretty good so far, but as you can see, it is a little bit off the mark from our reference color. So we took our soft glow, and if we hit Shift Spacebar on our keyboard, all you have to do is hit CC, and you're going to pull up the color corrector node in your toolbar. When we plug our soft glow into our color corrector and we threw that up into our viewer, you'll see that as far as our glow goes, the color is a lot closer to our original reference. And the way we were able to actually manipulate that color was by grabbing our color wheel here and just pulling our tint towards blue, then we also pulled our gamma down a little bit. If we leave the gamma up, we end up with something that's a little bit more of a light blue, and for this effect, that is not something that we want. So last but not least, to complete our main text, we took a copy of our original over here, we pasted it over here, and then we merged it over top of all of our work so far. The only difference is that we went into our shading elements and we unchecked our text body. Otherwise, we end up with something like this, which we don't need because we're not doing any kind of duplicate work. So with this complete, now it's time to make the very subtle lightning effect that we have on the first text layer. Now, when it comes to creating procedurally generated movement effects, one node stands above the rest, and that is the fast noise node. Now, the fast noise node, for anyone who's been on the channel before, say it with me, the fast noise is basically just a smoke generator that you happen to be able to use to make a lot of things you normally wouldn't think about. In our case, we're going to use smoke to create lightning. Doesn't make sense. Good news is, doesn't have to. Now, normally a fast noise node is going to look like this, but if we increase the detail, we add a little bit more texture to our fast noise. If we bring the contrast up, we're adding a little bit of separation between the dark and light parts. If we uncheck our lock XY for the scale, we can increase just how much smoke there is on our viewer, and we can even put it to something very, very extreme. And now you have something that looks a lot closer to static instead of smoke. Then if we pull the seed rate up, now you have moving static. Now, the entire reason this is useful is because we are going to use our fast noise node as a mask for a copy of our main text right here. So if we take a copy of our original text and we hit Control-Shift-V on our keyboard, you're going to paste an instance of that text. Now, an instance would be similar to the copy that we have over here, except the instance is going to do exactly what the main text does, meaning that if we change the size of this node, our instance is also going to have its size changed. Now, we basically want all of the exact same stuff on this instance node to be the same as this one, with one exception. And that is that just like with our shading elements on this one, we want the first shading element on this one turned off as well. And the reason we didn't just make a copy of this one and then turn shading element 1 off is so that I can show you guys exactly how to do this for if you need to use instances at any point down the road. This is kind of giving you guys a little bit of a practical use case. Because if you decide to make any kind of adjustments to this down the road, you're going to want those changes to apply to this one and to this one. Fortunately for us, I've done all these changes ahead of time. But typically, if you're making multiple copies of something and you're only planning on changing 1 or 2 properties and you want everything else to stay the same, instances are a very, very useful tool. So with our instance text selected, we went up into the shading tab, and then we right-clicked on the word enabled here, and we clicked on de-instance. For me, it says re-instance because I've already de-instanced it. And basically what you're doing when you de-instance something is you're saying this setting is no longer going to do whatever the original does. And that is what allows us to have this do basically everything that the original one does, but have the first shading element disabled. And so with our fast noise plugged in to our instance text, we end up with something that looks like this. So now we kind of have the texture that we want for our lightning. Now we actually need to make it move around. And the way we're going to do that is with another really, really good combination of nodes, the fast noise and displace node. Now, the displace node basically acts as a warp node. It will warp whatever you plug into the background input using the information that you give it in its foreground input. So what we've done here is we've plugged our instance text into our displace node to say, hey, I want to warp this text. And then we plugged another fast noise node into the displace to say, use our fast noise data in order to tell the text exactly how to warp. And when we plug it into our viewer, it looks like this. So it's giving us this really, really cool ripple kind of warping. And to set it up in such a way where it's going to actually follow what you're seeing on the screen, what we did is we took a fast noise node and we brought our detail up a little bit, but not too high. We actually pulled our contrast down. We did pull our X and Y scale up a little bit because we did want the lightning bolts to move in a very small scale. We didn't want them to be making these big, massive, jagged edges. If I do something like this, you're going to see we have these really big jagged edges that are kind of squishing the text. instead of pushing it out. Then we also brought up our seethe rate. Now the seethe rate is what actually moves our smoke around. And when you plug moving information into your displace, it is going to create movement in the warping as well. In our case, it's going to create this lightning effect. Now, as for the displace node itself, we changed our type from radial to XY. Radial applies a kind of global warping to whatever you plug into it. XY gives us control over the X and Y axis, so we can get a little bit more of a focused warp. Then we pulled our X and Y offset down because we didn't want our X and Y refraction to kind of pull our text to one side or up and down in one direction. We wanted it to stay in relatively the same position. Then all we needed to do was adjust our X and Y refraction up a little bit because, again, we only wanted to warp our text a tiny bit. If I pull my X refraction up a whole bunch, you're seeing that we're kind of destroying our text. The same if I pull the Y up, right? If I have both of these all the way up, you get something that's not even recognizable. And so that is why we have these pulled up just a tiny bit, because just like in our reference here, we only have a tiny bit of movement taking place with the warping of our lightning. Then after we had all of that set up, we plugged the entire thing into a glow. We're going to change our color settings to be similar to our first glow. So we're turning off the red and we're turning off the alpha. And we're setting this up in such a way where we're just having a very subtle glow. Then we're going to plug that into a soft glow to give it a little bit more of a feathered effect. Then we're going to plug that into a color correction node. We're going to pull it towards the blue that we want using our color wheel. And this time we didn't adjust our gamma at all, but we did crank our saturation all the way to the maximum. And what ends up happening when we merge this underneath of our original text is we get something like this, where we have lightning, just like in our original, that is underneath of our first text outline. Pretty cool. So then we took the entire thing, I plugged it into a transform node, and I actually adjusted my size up a little bit. You probably won't need this. You can just set up your text from the beginning to have the size that you want. I just wanted to make a very, very tiny adjustment to the size of my text. I didn't change anything else. So now when we look at our text animating in, it looks pretty good in comparison to our reference, but it's missing something. And props to you if you've already noticed. If you haven't, what we're missing is our motion blur. And you can see that this is a very, very aggressive motion blur. Like look at the comparison, right? By the time it stops moving, you've got basically zero blur, but when it is moving, it stretches. And normally the way that I would try to achieve a motion blur effect like this in Resolve would be by clicking on my main text. I would go up into settings in the inspector and I would just check off motion blur. And then I would just bring my quality all the way up to 10 and I would watch it as it zooms in. The only problem with this is that we end up with all of these lines right here, which we absolutely don't want. You can see we have 0 horizontal lines. So we had to get a little bit creative. Let me turn motion blur back off here. And instead, after my transform node, what I did is I plugged that into a directional blur node. And you can see immediately we've got something that looks much, much better in comparison to our reference. But the effect won't by default look like this. The reason we have this selective directional blur, where it's only affecting the letters that are moving, is because of this rectangle mask node right here. Now, if I disconnect this from our directional blur, you can see that the blur stays on our text even after it animates. Every single letter stays blurred completely. What this rectangle mask is doing is controlling what gets blurred by basically setting a bounding box and saying anything that is either inside this box or outside this box is going to get some form of blur. So if I reconnect this to our directional blur, you can see we've set this up with some keyframes here. And just to take a quick look at our settings, what we've done with our rectangle is we've brought our width and our height all the way up, and we have actually inverted the effect of the box because we're going to want everything that is outside of the box to be blurred. And then once our text gets inside of the box, we're going to want to remove that blur effect completely. We also have our soft edge animated because we don't want our text to go from being completely blurred to completely not blurred. We want there to be a bit of a smooth transition in between. So what this ends up looking like is we start off at our first frame where our text is not in our viewer. Then as soon as we've got it on frame, you'll notice we are animating our soft edge to slowly move up, and we're also going to adjust our actual center position. So I give this 1 frame of clarity, similar to how it shows up in our reference. And then instantly we're moving this box over. And what we're saying is that, hey, anything that is outside of the black box is getting blurred. And you can see we have a very slight feather for the border of the box. So anything that is on this white area is going to get blurred. So if I just play this through, you can see we're slowly animating our soft edge up. And then by the time our animation finishes, we're setting everything back to normal settings. And what this looks like when it's connected to our directional blur is we have our text outside of a rectangle blurred. And then because eventually I am going to unblur, right? We move our rectangle over from right to left, unblurring the C. And then as the rest of our letters slowly move into position, we are getting rid of that directional blur. So to show you just what the mask is doing, right? It's slowly feathering out. So things are slowly going from blurred to unblurred. So boom, just like that, we end up with the same kind of blur effect using our directional blur and a mask that we have in our reference. Pretty darn cool. Then as well, because the entire effect itself does slowly shrink over time, what we've done is we've plugged everything into a transform node here, and we have slowly animated our size and even our center a little bit so that we are slowly zooming out all the way until the point where the screen cracks and then shatters. And that is how we make the main text for the Sonic trailer. If you're loving the content, stay tuned, hit like, subscribe, and buckle up because we have only just begun. All right, the next step is going to be recreating basically the same process for our number 4 here. And I actually ran into a really weird challenge when doing this, which, believe it or not, has to do entirely with the color. So we're going to start off with the exact same method that we did for the original Sonic text. Of course, we're using the same font. We've adjusted our size to be a little bit bigger than the original Sonic text because that is how it is in our reference. Right, we've got both of our shading elements turned on. The difference is that with shading element 2, we have turned it up to be white. Then with the softness, we've left the X softness all the way down, and we've only turned up the Y softness. Now, you'll notice as well in the text box here, I actually have Sonic 4 written out, and only the 4 is showing. That is because I ended up using character level styling. I was playing around a little bit, and you can add character level styling by right-clicking on the box and clicking on character level styling right here. Now, for those of you who don't know what character level styling does, it allows you to animate and adjust properties of letters individually. And so in this text node right here, I actually do have SONIC. I just have them invisible. If you're following alongside and you're making this yourself, you don't need to do character level styling. You don't need to do this. You can just type in 4 and give it the same properties that you did the original Sonic text. Right, so remember as well, put your shear down to -0.3 so that you have that same kind of lean that we do in the original. Just thought I would cover that in case anyone was wondering, hey, why do you have this written in here? So we're following the same process, right? Setting up our outline and our text body, plugging it into the duplicate so that we're getting this same kind of faded effect. Then we're plugging it into our Luma keyer. And now with our glow node this time, when we plug in, we're going to uncheck green, blue, and our alpha so that we are only getting a red glow. Then we're plugging our first glow into a soft glow, and we're not worrying about using the first one as a mask. Then we take our color corrector and we adjust our settings in our tint right here on our color wheel to push it closer towards the pink that we want from our reference. Then we're gonna make our lightning. And so we're gonna take another fast noise node and we're gonna adjust our settings to basically turn it into static. We're gonna plug that into an instance of our 4 text. And remember, we are going to want to de-instance the enable part of shading element 1 so that we can toggle off the text body. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something like this. Then we're plugging both of those into our fast noise displace combo to get our really cool lightning effect right here. We're gonna throw that into our same glow node that we have down here. And you can see we've adjusted our settings only a tiny bit, but we have kept the green, blue, and alpha left off. Next, our lightning's gonna go into the soft glow node to give it a little bit more aura. And then just like with our first color corrector, the second one is also going to get the same treatment of yanking our saturation up and pulling our tint over to match our reference. Then when we merge our lightning underneath of our original text, we end up with something like this. And you can see that the lightning itself doesn't appear exactly the same as our blue lightning. And that I have found is to do almost entirely with it being more of a red color instead of blue. That is why when we look at our glow settings over here, right, for both the glow and the soft glow, they are entirely different and even an entirely different setup in comparison to the settings that we have for our soft glow and our glow over here. Different colors are just going to react differently to the glow settings. So feel free to play around, do a little bit of experimentation until you get something that you're comfortable with, but don't be surprised if you try to recycle the exact same settings that you used on the blue and paste them on the red. You're gonna get some undesirable results. So once we have our lightning text underneath of our number text, we're gonna throw the entire thing into a soft glow to again give it a little bit more aura. And we're going to take the output of our merge and plug that into the mask input of our soft glow to again keep that super bright to instant fall off effect. Then we take our soft glow, and with this soft glow, we didn't turn off everything but the red. So we're taking this soft glow and we are plugging it into a transform node. And this is where the animation for our number 4 is going to take place, because you'll remember at the beginning, we have our number 4 animate in before it actually takes its place with the rest of the text. So what we've done is all the way at the beginning of our fusion composition here, we've added keyframes for our center, for our size, and for our angle. Now, one other setting you'll notice we've changed is our pivot. And that is because for the actual text rotation and for the size changes, we want the size changes taking place from the center of the text. Because if we move our pivot anywhere else, our text, when it shrinks, is actually going to move closer towards the pivot. And we don't want it moving. We just want it actually shrinking from the center. So with our transform selected, we've added in our keyframes for our angle, our size, and our aspect, and we've adjusted them to get a similar kind of positioning. And one thing that I like to do when I'm recreating effects like this is I will take the recreation that I'm making, and what I'll end up doing is I'll take a copy of my reference, and then I will just paste them on top of each other with a merge node so that when I'm animating them, I have something to compare to. So starting at our first frame, we are slowly sizing our text down, and on our transform node, we've actually gone into our settings and we have turned on our motion blur for our movement. So we've got our quality all the way up, which is going to give us a wider range of blur so that when I'm pulling my text down to here, you can see it's kind of a long blur as opposed to just being blurry at the source. If I pull our quality down, you can see we get kind of a few after images, but we don't get anything that looks very good. So we've got our motion blur quality all the way up on our transform node. Then back in our controls, you can see we're slowly pulling our size down to shrink our text. We're bringing our angle down so that it is slowly evening out and becoming level. And then we are also adjusting our center position to bring it exactly to the center of the screen where our reference also is. Then once our text actually reaches the point of impact where it would stop moving, we go into the settings tab of our transform and we actually turn our motion blur off. So we have one keyframe, which is the last keyframe that our motion blur is going to be on. And then on the next frame, we turn it off. The reason we turn off motion blur when we don't need it is because it is very, very resource hungry. If you leave motion blur on for your entire fusion composition, a lot of the time you're going to notice that you're not going to get smooth playback, or sometimes your computer might just brick and crash resolve. So very, very important. Only use motion blur when you need it. Otherwise, turn it off. So back in the controls tab, once we hit the point of impact, our number 4 is slowly shrinking, just like how our Sonic text is also shrinking when it comes onto the screen. Then when it's time for our text to move over, we add another keyframe on our center, and then we just pull it from left to right. And you'll notice something else, which is that up until this point, we've only had a single digit. But once our number 4 gets pushed over, that is when we decide to show our duplicates. Then we just continue to shrink down until we hit the point of our text shattering. Now, the way we actually are animating our duplicates is right over here on our duplicate node, and we're animating this at the same time as we're animating our transform node to move our number 4 over, where we're just having our center set to its default, which is 0.5 and 0.5. And then by the time it moves all the way over, we're moving our X value over slightly to pull our duplicates into view. So to start from the beginning, we've got our number 4 animates on, and then our duplicates become visible. Now, one last touch of detail before we move on to the next part of the effect. So if you're looking at our reference here, you'll see the C actually cuts off or blocks part of the 4. And because we've used our Luma keyer to get rid of the background behind our text, these two things actually overlap. And this is a very, very easy fix. All I did was take a copy of our original text. Then I also took a copy of the 2 transform nodes we used to animate it, then pasted them down here in the exact same order that we have up here. Then we took our lightning 4 text. We plugged that into the foreground input of a merge node. We plugged a blank background into the background. We made sure to turn the alpha off and make sure the color was set to black so we can get a transparent background. Then we took the transform, which is connected to the copy of our main text here, and we plugged that into the mask input of our merge node. Then when I take the merge node and I put it into the viewer here, you'll see we now have a little cookie cutter cutoff point for our number 4. And the way that we can do this is by going into the settings panel of our merge node and clicking apply mask inverted. And basically what this is doing is it is acting just like a normal rectangle mask, which you can access from up here. And it's saying, hey, whatever is outside of this text is what will be shown. If I uncheck this, then it will do whatever is inside of this text will be shown. And so that is how we get the little cutout for our number 4. Then in order to apply the exact same blur effect that we have with our directional blur, we just copy and pasted an instance of each. So we've got our instance directional blur and we've got our instance rectangle mask. So now when our 4 is moving over, we get boom, something just like that. And when we have both of our texts merged together, we get this. Pretty darn cool. All right, so now that we have our text made, it's time to give it a background to sit on, as well as a little bit of camera shake to help sell the effect. So after our merge node, we are going to plug that into a camera shake node, which you can again access by hitting Shift Spacebar and typing in camera shake. You're going to use this one right here. Now, when you plug your Fusion Comp into your camera shake node, it is going to start out being very, very crazy. And that's completely okay. Just follow along and I'm going to show you exactly what we're going to do. So the first camera shake we are adding on here is a nice shake effect for when our text actually shatters. And the reason we're adding it now as opposed to at the end and shaking everything is because I only want our text to be shaking. So I'm going to go a couple frames right before the entire screen starts to crack. And you can see we've added some keyframes right here. I've brought everything down to 0. And then the closer that we get to the actual breaking and shattering of the screen on our reference, the closer that we get to our next keyframe, where I bring the values for our X, Y, and rotation deviation up just a little bit. These are the properties that are going to control the range of movement. So how far our text can shake both up, down, and how much it can rotate. And then we've got our randomness, our overall strength, and the speed at which it shakes. Once it hits here and it actually shatters, that's when we're going to spike everything up. And you can see our X, Y, and randomness goes up along with our speed. And then over the next couple frames, we pull it right down. Then also, because we want our keyframes for our transform to actually be smooth, we're going to go into our spline editor. I'm going to pop out this window and you can see here we have our motion blur, we have our actual center movement, so we have our X and Y movement, then we have our size and our angle. Now if I pull this back, we can see we have our size and angle set to a very basic linear motion, and then as soon as we hit the point of impact, our size goes from this very steep change to a very, very slow shrink effect. And then when we pull our number 4 from left to right, we're easing both in and then out of the effect itself. So we're starting slow, then going fast, and then right as we hit the end, we slow down again. And setting up our keyframes like this is what is allowing us to really sell the motion of the effect and make it look just like our original. And then if I go to our duplicate node that we have at the beginning, we are leaving our duplicate node set to just its basic linear transform. All right, and so now when we look at our effect played back with our camera shake, we can see now we've got a little bit of motion so that when we add in our shatter effect later, we're actually going to feel the tension as if there is something that is breaking our text and it's not just shattering all on its own with zero momentum or force behind it. Then once again, I added in a transform node so that I could adjust the size of everything all together just a little bit. And now it's time to give our text finally a background to sit on. And if we look at our reference here, we can see we've got at first a pink cloud to sit on here. And then as our blue text comes in, we do get a little bit more of a blue effect around here. And so we're going to do a little bit of a combination of pink and blue for our smoke. And we're even going to add on a little bit of extra texture by adding in a couple white spots and adding in some particles that we see right here. And so the way we're going to create this background is mainly with, you guessed it, the fast noise node. Now, because I want the blue part of our effect to kind of be contained to more or less the center of the screen, we're going to start off with an ellipse node, which you can access by just hitting Shift Spacebar and typing in ellipse, and here it is right here. Then what I've done is in the inspector, I've brought our soft edge all the way up, and then we've increased both the height and the width, and we've adjusted the center a little bit so that it's pulled a little bit off to the left because the blue sonic text is going to have a slight offset to the left from the center of the screen. And this is going to act as the area of effect or the area of visibility for the blue smoky part. But I don't want this to be a perfect circle, so we're going to use a fast noise and a displace to kind of warp the ellipse. So here we are, we've got our fast noise, we've brought our contrast all the way up, we've increased our X scale a little bit, and we've increased our seethe a little bit so that we will have a little bit of a change in our warp information, which will allow us to warp our ellipse mask and warp the area of effect over time. Then when we plug that into our displace node, you can see we've got our type set to XY, just like always. X offset and Y offset are brought all the way down. And then we've brought the refraction on both the X and the Y up. And that ends up giving us this result right here. And so these three things together here are going to act as a mask for our blue fast noise, which we've set up to look like this. You can see we've added some adjustments to our detail, our contrast, our scale, and our seethe rate. And then in the color tab here, we've switched our type from two color to gradient. And on the left side here, we have just a very dark blue color that we can use that's similar to the glow of our sonic text. And then on the right side color here, we've changed this to a semi-transparent black color. And with our seethe rate up, that gives us a nice dark blue smoky effect. So when we plug our mask that we've made using our fast noise, our ellipse, and our displace into the mask input of our fast noise, we get something like this. So now we've only got our blue on the center of our screen, and we're keeping some of these very dark parts behind the text alive as well. Then, because the main color in our reference is pink, we're gonna get another fast noise node here. Let's drag this into our viewer. You can see we've adjusted our detail, our contrast, our scale, our seethe, and our seethe rate. Then in the color, we've once again changed our type from two color to gradient. This allows us a little bit more control over the color of the smoke in our fast noise. You can see we've got a little bit of a pink color here. Further down, we've got more of a dark red, one that we have dragged the alpha all the way down for, otherwise we end up with something like this. And we want to keep a bit of a transparent or semi-transparent feel going. And then with our black, we've got our black turned all the way up. So if we merge our blue fast noise over top of our pink fast noise, we end up with something like this. Then we're gonna take all of these, merge them over top of a simple black background, and boom, we get something like this. So already taking really good shape where we've only got a tiny bit of blue in here. It's mostly pink with some dark spots. Last but not least, we want to add a little bit more texture, give ourselves a little bit more of an illusion that we've got some more depth in here. The way we're going to do that is by adding in some bright spots for our smoke. We're going to perceive the bright spots as closer and the dark spots as further away. So we've got one more fast noise node here. You can see we've got our detail, our contrast, and our brightness up all the way here. So we've got an insane amount of separation between the dark and light parts. We've brought up our scale, our seethe, and our seethe rate. And this time we're leaving our color set to 2 color. We're leaving our black turned all the way up, and we're bringing the alpha of our white part all the way down. And when we bring the white part of our alpha all the way down, you can see we get a little bit of a semi-transparent effect right here. And now finally, with all of our fast noises set up, we're going to merge this one over top of everything else. And in our merge node, we're going to bring our blend mode down to something very, very subtle, like 0.012. And now we've added in a little bit of extra texture. Here's what it looks like before and after. Then to give the entire thing a little bit more texture, we plugged everything into a film grain node, which you can find right here. Then after making some adjustments to our controls here, we end up with something that looks like this. So here's before, here's after, and that also helps to hide the kind of banding effect we have here, where I don't even know if you'll be able to see it on this monitor, but you can see the colors are not blending super well because there's such a gradual change. So when we add our film grain on, it helps to kind of hide our banding, and that gives us this nice cool effect for our background. Now, let's merge our text on top of our background, and just like that, we have the basics of the Sonic 4 trailer effect done, right? You've got your text, you've got it animated, you've got the blur, and you have the background, right? If you wanted to, you could stop now and be like, all right, I've got my effect. Thank you very much, I'm gone. But if you wanna make it look premium, keep watching because we are about to get into the really cool part. It's lightning, we're doing lightning. So if you remember at the beginning, I told you that we were going to have to create this lightning effect right here, where we have kind of a lightning strike that comes down from the corner of the text and then kind of fizzles out. To make something like this might seem simple, but in order to make it look good, you have to get really creative. And I'm gonna show you exactly why right now. Now, just for reference, here's the version we ended up making compared to our reference. And it looks pretty darn cool. But the way most people will normally do lightning is kind of like this. They'll get their text node, they'll make a copy of it, and then in the copy, they'll go into their shading elements and they'll set it up so that it is only the exterior. Then they'll use a combination that you're probably sick of hearing by now, which is a fast noise and a displace. And they will plug the outline into the displace along with their fast noise, and they will end up with something like this. Then they will take their displace and they'll put that on top of their text. They might add a glow onto their lightning portion as well. And they'll go, look, I've got lightning on top of my text. Now, at a glance, this looks okay, it's passable, but if you want something custom, if you want lightning that has very specific direction, then a warped text outline just isn't gonna cut it. So what we ended up doing is as follows. Now, in order to wrap your head around how this effect works, it's important that you understand how the displace node works. Basically, when you take a displace node and you feed it warping information, the displace node is looking at the light data to determine how it's going to warp the information that you feed it. And then once the displace node has the light data from here, it's going to say, okay, the brighter an area is, the more I'm going to warp it. And the darker an area is, the more I'm gonna leave it alone. So if I take my fast noise node right here, and we had to try and figure out which parts on this canvas are going to be warped, we can see that right here, we're going to have very little warping in comparison to maybe an area like right here or right here. And that is how the displace node determines how it's going to warp whatever you feed it. Now, with that in mind, let's make some cool lightning. We're gonna start off with a fast noise node. And just looking at this, you're probably going, that looks nothing like smoke. And you'd be absolutely right. The way we created this was by bringing our detail down, we brought our contrast all the way up and our brightness all the way down. Then we unchecked our X and Y scale so that we can move them independently of each other. And we brought our Y scale all the way down and we brought our X scale up to about 35. And that is what gives us these straight lines here. Now in the color tab as well, in order to make sure that we are getting these lines to be as clean as possible, we're going to want very little feathering for this effect. We changed our type from to color to gradient. And then for the black and white, we just brought them very, very close to each other. Then for the white, we left the white completely visible. And for the black, we turned the black down all the way. So now that we've got some lines here, we're ready to move on with the rest of the effect. These are going to be our lightning lines, for lack of a better term. And you can see that in our reference, our lines are not all straight and they actually originate from one point. So how am I going to get all of these to kind of start from one point? Well, I'm going to use a dent node, which you can access by just typing in dent in your toolbar, and we're going to use the top one. So let's plug our dent node into our viewer. And now you can see this is starting to take shape. If we're imagining that this is the top right corner of our 4 here, we would have all these lines acting as lightning springing forth from the corner. And we already know how to warp things using a fast noise and a displace. So now we just need to set up the actual positioning with our dent. You can see we have made some adjustments to our size and our strength in order to make this possible. Otherwise, just by default, you end up with something like this. So what we've done is we've plugged our fast noise and our dent into a transform node, and then we've taken a copy of our text that we used to make our number 4, which is right here, and we've placed it in our composition right here. Now, in the shading tab of this text, this time we're actually going to uncheck shading element 2 and we're going to leave shading element 1 on. Then for the type, we're going to change a type from solid to image, because what we want to do is make sure that our lightning will only show up inside of our number 4. And we don't want to be using any of the native colors that we would normally have in our text. So when we click over to image here, we can click and drag our transform just directly into here. And you should notice a little bit of a change taking place. And that change is that now only your fast noise should be showing up inside the text, and it should be using the text as kind of a containment box. So it will only show up inside of where the text would show up, and it will be the only part of the text that will show up. A little bit confusing, but once you get the hang of it, really, really cool. A lot of really good use cases. So then we're going to take all of our nodes here. We're going to plug it into a fast noise displace combo. Here are the settings we're using for our fast noise. Remember to keep your seethe rate up so that you have lightning movement. Then when we plug it into our displace, again, we're going to switch our type from radial to XY, going to bring down our X and Y offset. And this time I'm only bringing my X offset up because I don't want any kind of up and down warping taking place. And you can see we've got something pretty cool taking place here. But in order to make sure that our lightning only shows up when we need it, and it's not just existing forever on our text, once again, we are going to use a rectangle node to act as the mask or the area of visibility for our lightning. So we're going to take a rectangle mask, which you can either access here, or you can also just, shift spacebar rectangle, and we're going to plug that into our text. Now, unlike our directional blur rectangle, we are going to leave this one with the inverted checkbox off because we are going to want everything inside of the box to be visible. We are going to drag our soft edge up just a little bit because we still do want a smooth change in visibility. So that will look like this. You can see we've got a little bit of feathering. And then all we did was add a keyframe for our center values and then animate our rectangle mask so that it would be overlaid on top of our text when it was time for our lightning to show up. So right when our lightning is about to start, we've got a keyframe, and then we slowly keyframe our rectangle mask to come down so that when we've got lightning over top of our entire number here, we will also have our lightning data on top of our number 4 here. And then as soon as it's time for our lightning to go, we once again have more keyframes for our rectangle mask, and we just pull it off very quick like that. And then when it's time for our lightning to come back, you can see we once again have our center keyframed, and we pull it right back onto the screen before pulling it off again. Now with our lightning lines plugged into our fast noise displace combo, we get something like this. Now, to make sure that our lightning will follow the exact same sizing and positioning that our original number 4 text does, we've taken this transform here, we've copied it, and we've pasted it into our Fusion composition. Then we plug that into a glow node, and just like with our original number 4 text, we are going to turn off all of our colors except for red, and we're going to make some adjustments to our settings. Then we're going to plug our glow into a soft glow to give it a little bit more aura, and then last but not least, plug that into a color corrector, make some adjustments to our tint and saturation to give it that same pink feel that we have in our reference. And now to finally see the fruits of our labor, when we paste this on top of our text and our background, we end up with something like this. And I'll have our rectangle overlay on top so you can see exactly what's happening as it's taking place. You can see we've got the lightning slowly coming on, and then we fade it off as it fades in our reference. Then when it's time for the lightning to come back on, it comes back on from the left side just like in our reference. And what we've also done in our transform is we've changed the area where our lightning is appearing from the top right corner to the center, so that when our lightning appears the second time, it is actually appearing from the middle instead of from the top right corner. Then we pull our rectangle mask off again, and then once more, our mask comes back on to show our lightning, and away it goes. Pretty darn cool. A really cool way of setting up your lightning so that you have a little bit more control over it. You can make it seem like it's traveling across something instead of just kind of moving around in one place. Now that we have the lightning set up for our number text, it's time to set up the lightning for our main text. And this is a little bit different for the reason that we are working with several letters here. And the thing is, if I go back to our number text right here and we go to our image panel where we can see we've changed our type from solid to image, and we're using our transform, fast noise, and dent data as kind of a combination of the actual data that's going to show up in the 4 as well as kind of a mask for the 4. Using this exact same method is not going to work with multiple letters, because the way it's going to be interpreted is it's either going to go directly from the center and then travel out across each letter, which we don't necessarily want. We do want a little bit of jumping with each letter, or it's going to apply this exact same thing individually to each letter, which is going to look way too uniform. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the original method that I showed you a lot of people do, and we're going to dress it up a little bit so that it seems a lot more natural. So you can see right here, we have set up a normal fast noise displace combo. We've got our fast noise set up with a couple adjustments, and of course our seethe rate turned all the way up. We've got our displace node set up, always with the XY, X offset and Y offset down, and then X refraction brought all the way up, and Y refraction increased just a little bit. Then we've taken a copy of our main sonic text all the way from the first part of our composition. And in our shading tab, we are turning off shading element 1. Then in shading element 2, we're changing our color type from solid to image, and we're going to be using this fast noise right here. And in the fast noise, you can see we've increased our contrast a little bit. We have increased our seethe rate. And in the color tab, we've changed our type from 2-color to gradient. And we've brought our 2 colors a little bit closer together. Our black is of course turned all the way down, and our white we've kept all the way up. And our fast noise will end up looking something like this. And when we click and drag our fast noise inside of the shading element 2 color area of our text, we end up with something like this. And so what is happening is this fast noise is being used as a mask for the text, just like with the number 4, but because each letter is different, we're going to get the same kind of flow, but we're going to get a different result because every letter has a different shape. Then once we plug our text into our displace data, we get something like this. So we're not always going to have a complete outline of our text, which looks a lot cleaner than the super basic version I showed you. Then we're going to plug all of this into our glow, and this is actually going to be a similar glow to the one we used for our number 4. We do have only the red turned on. Then we're plugging that into a soft glow to give it a little bit more aura, and we're plugging that into a color corrector node, and this time we're pulling it all the way over to blue, still keeping the saturation all the way turned up, and we end up with this really cool lightning text effect that doesn't have the complete outline, keeping it looking pretty cool and pretty natural. And it ends up looking like this when we have it on top of our actual visible sonic text. And because our lightning only appears periodically, we're going to do the same thing we did over here with our rectangle mask, right? We're going to take a rectangle mask, we're going to plug it into the mask input of our text, and we're only going to have our lightning animate on when it's showing up in our reference, and the rest of the time it's going to be invisible. Boom, just like that. So we've made it just about halfway through the tutorial so far. If you're loving the content and you want to see more, let me know by liking, subscribing, leave a comment down below as well. Let me know what other kind of effects and what other kind of content you want to see on the channel. There is so much insane stuff we can do in DaVinci Resolve, and not all of it is in the Fusion page. So leave a comment down below, let me know what you want to see, and without further ado, let's get back to the tutorial. All right, moving on to the next part of the tutorial, we're going to add on our subtext, and this will probably be the easiest part of the tutorial, right? You can see we've got two nodes here, and then we merge it on top with a merge node. I don't think there will be an easier part to the tutorial than this. So to start us off, the font we are using for our subtext is Etrusco Now Condensed, and we're using the bold version of that font. I will leave a link to it down in the description if you want to get it for yourself. Now, there are a few adjustments we've made in the main text tab here. The first one is our tracking. We've increased our tracking quite a bit, and that's how we've done the letter spacing that we have in our reference. And then something else I did is I changed our H anchor to be all the way over to the right. And this is so that when we are merging our text on top of everything else, we know exactly where the right side is going to end up. Then adjusting the tracking becomes really, really easy because all I have to do is stretch it out until it hits the end of the S here. So then we're going to do the same thing that we did with our Sonic text, which is right click and add the follower node in the modifiers tab. In the modifiers tab, we're doing basically the same thing we did with our Sonic text, which is adding a keyframe on our transform, and then we're pulling our text off of the screen. Then we're moving forward, and we are adding another keyframe to animate our text in. I also used the same little delay trick where I added a keyframe on delay and then increased the delay slowly over time. Now, one last thing we did with our text, because we wanted to have a little bit of the motion blur that we have in our reference, is we went into the settings tab of our text and we added on some motion blur. And I actually don't have the motion blur itself keyframed, so remember to keyframe your motion blur off when you're not using it. Then we took a transform node, plugged our text into the transform node, and we added on the same kind of slow shrinking animation that we have in our reference. Then we merged it on top of everything else, and there we go. Now we have our subtext. That's about as easy as it's gonna get. Next, it is time for us to add our background particles. You'll notice in our reference, we've got some particles floating around. And this is one of those small accents that helps you to really sell the quality of an effect. So let's take a look at what this looks like when it's on. I might even turn this up just a bit so you guys can see them a little bit better. There you go. Now you can see we've got some particles just very subtly floating around. The way that we're actually going to add these particles into our Fusion composition is by starting off with a P emitter node, which you can get by, once again, typing in P emitter in your toolbar. In order to actually see our particles, we will need to plug our P emitter node into a P render node. We're going to click and drag this up into our viewer, and your screen should look something similar to this. Now, there's a lot of different settings than what you're used to when it comes to particle sets and particle emitter nodes. So really pay attention for this part. In our controls, we have our emission settings, which controls the amount of particles that we are generating every single frame. If we have any variance between the number we generate each frame, the lifespan of those particles, along with the lifespan variance and a few other settings. We also have velocity, which is the movement and movement speed of our particles. We're going to leave all of this alone for now. The first thing we're going to do is go into style. And this is where we're actually going to adjust the look of our particles. Now, if I zoom in very close here using middle mouse button, and left click, now you can actually see the particles I've generated here. And if I middle mouse button and right click, I can move around to kind of get a different view of my particles. And this is what I have generated here. And this is what is going onto our background. Now in style, I've changed my style from point to blob. And typically when you're doing particle work, you'll usually use blob because you can play around with the size and the size variance a lot easier. And it tends to just look a lot better for a lot of different effects. So after adjusting the style to blob, your screen is probably going to look like an explosion of particles overlaying on top of each other. And that is because the blob size by default is very, very big. So I pulled my size all the way down to 0.001, and then we added a tiny bit of size variance. Now, as far as the lifespan of our particles, we can control if our particles simply exist and then stop existing, or if they fade in and fade out. And so what I've done here is I've adjusted my fade controls. So over the lifespan of each particle, it will fade in for 0.2 of its lifespan and fade out after about 0.8. We also have in our color controls here, the ability to adjust the color variance between particles. And typically what I will do is I will leave my color set to just white like this, and then I will adjust the color variance here. Now by default, these are all going to be set to 0, 0. The higher the value for one, the more often you're going to see red in your particles, and the lower the value, the more you're removing that color from your particles. And so you can see here, I'm using a combination of red and blue, and that is giving us a nice little combination of pink and purple particles. Now, back in the control tab, we adjusted the number of particles we wanted to be generated each frame to 30, and then we adjusted the lifespan to be 125. So each particle is going to last for roughly 125 frames. We've adjusted the lifespan variance by 50 frames, meaning that there's going to be about 50 frames of variance between the shortest lifespan of a particle and the longest lifespan of a particle. Then we adjusted our velocity. And when we turn our velocity up, by default, all of our particles are going to move in one direction, and they're all going to move at the same speed, which is why we also increase our velocity variance, which will change the speed of each particle. Then we adjusted our angle variance to be 360. This allows our particles to move in any and all directions. After that, we adjusted the Z angle and the Z angle variance, and this controls where the particles move in 3D space. So your Z angle is if they're moving closer or further away. And if I click play on our particle emitter, you can see that this is what we end up with. Then we plugged our P emitter node into a P turbulence node. And a P turbulence node is exactly what you would expect. It's just going to add a little bit of extra rough and random movement to our particles. What I've done is I've brought the X, Y, and Z strength almost all the way down, and I've left the density alone. This will just add a little bit more push and pull between my particles. Then we're going to take our P render and we're going to connect it to a merge 3D. Now a merge 3D is different than a normal merge. A normal merge is made for 2D fusion work. A merge 3D is made for connecting any node that works in 3D space. And you can get a merge 3D node directly from your toolbar. Then we're going to take a camera 3D, which you can also get from your toolbar, and we're going to plug that into the merge 3D node as well. Finally, we're going to add in a renderer 3D, which you can once again get from your toolbar. And then we can connect our merge 3D to our renderer 3D, and that will put our particles from existing in 3D space to being viewable in 2D space. This will also allow us to apply 2D effects onto them, like a blur, for example. And this is super subtle. You probably don't even need it, to be honest, but there's without the blur, there's with the blur. And last but not least, we're only going to blur the particles that are outside of our general text area. So what I've done is I've taken a rectangle node, we've brought the soft edge up, and we've just adjusted the size here. Then we plugged it into our blur, and we also checked off invert, meaning that anything outside of this box is going to be blurred and anything inside is going to be crystal clear. So now let's plug this in, and bam, there we go. We've got our particles. All right, and now we're moving into the end game here. We've got a few more things to cover before we can call this effect complete. We need to create the crack effect that we get on our screen here. We need to create the actual shatter effect of the screen shattering. We need to create the displacement effect that we get from our screen cracking. And then we're also going to add in the particles that we get here from the screen shattering. Last but not least, because we have an entirely new layer underneath of our screen shatter, we're going to have our date text and our date background. Let's dive in, shall we? Now, the crack effect itself seems a little bit daunting just with all the nodes, but it's actually very, very simple. It's just the same process done over and over. Just follow along and you will have this down in no time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our first version right here and I'm going to move it into its own little area just so it is much easier to focus on. So we're going to take our merge node and we're going to plug it into a transform and we're going to merge it on top of a blank background. So we've got a background node right here, brought our color down to black, and we've brought our alpha down all the way. And then with these two things merged together, we've taken a simple polygon node right here, and we've just created a simple shape. Now let's move this back over into our crack effect, and you'll see that all we've done is simply rinse and repeat this same process 5 different times. So we have piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, piece 4, and piece 5. And the way that you can actually create these pieces is with a simple polygon node. All you're going to do is grab a polygon node either from your toolbar directly or by using Shift Spacebar and typing it into your toolbar. You're going to connect your polygon node to the merge mask. And then you're just going to create a simple shape, making sure that you actually connect all of your dots so that it can create a little closed shape. Then for the rest of your shapes, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the walls of your shapes are lining up to be almost overlaid on top of the shapes that are beside them. So you can see we've got this shape almost on top of our first one. And then even with this one, which is on the opposite side, we've got our walls almost lining up, right? I can take our other polygon node right here and you can see I'm just kind of matching the lines. We're running them parallel. And this is what is going to create our crack effect. What we're doing is we're just taking a piece of our media, we're isolating it from the rest. And then in each of our transform nodes here, what we're doing is we're going up into our center and we're just adjusting our X and our Y values ever so slightly to offset our different pieces from each other. And once you have all of your different pieces set up how you would like, what we're going to do is we're going to take our different merge nodes and we're going to merge them over top of each other until we end up with something like this. And you can see that because of the work we've done with our transform, you can see this is slightly off from where our canvas position is. I think this is this one up here. Yeah. You can see that only what is inside of the puzzle piece is visible. And so because of the way we've set this up, it looks like we actually have broken our screen and our pieces are kind of shifting off of the center. So we've just taken our exact same merge that we have here and we're connecting it individually to each one of these transform nodes. Then we're also going to create a color corrector node and we're going to connect our merge into our color corrector node right here. Then let me drag this into our viewer. And what I've done here is simply boost our contrast. Then we've added on a transform node and I've bumped up the size and the center a whole bunch because in our reference right here in the blue areas, we've got blue cracks and in the red areas or the pink areas, we've got pink cracks. So I'm just increasing the size because this is going to go underneath of our cracked pieces right here. So then we're going to plug our transform into a soft glow node. And then you're going to notice immediately that as soon as we plug into our soft glow node, only the areas where the cracks are showing up. And this is because in the soft glow node, after adjusting some of our settings, we've gone into the settings tab and we've checked off multiply by mask and apply mask inverted. What this means is that we're taking our merge data here and we're saying only show what is inside of these different puzzle pieces because we're going to use them as a mask. And you can see we have a little bit of space in between each one. And then when we say apply mask inverted, we're going to say, okay, instead of only showing the areas where the puzzle pieces are or where the break pieces are, we're going to say only show the areas where the broken pieces are not. And that is how we get this effect right here. Then we're going to blur it a little bit by connecting our soft glow to a blur. And for the mask, make sure you have your final big merge right here with all of the pieces connected to the mask input of the soft glow. Once we connect to the blur, what we're going to do then is get one more merge node and we're going to merge this blur on top of our puzzle pieces. And so when I take this merge and I put it in our viewer, you can see we end up with a glow where our cracks are. Then we're going to take our merge, we're going to plug it into a soft glow, and then we're going to take our top merge here and we're going to plug that into the mask of the soft glow. Once more, after adjusting our settings, we're going to go to the settings tab of our soft glow and we're going to check off apply mask inverted. Otherwise, we're going to end up with something like this, which we don't want. And so you end up with kind of a transparent area to a nice glowy crack area. And so this is how we make the crack for our Sonic trailer effect. Then last but not least, we're going to merge this entire big group of nodes on top of everything else that we've done with a merge node. So this merge node is really getting put to work. It's going to be merged underneath of everything. And then what we're going to do is paying attention to our camera shake that we have over here, is we're going to take a look at our reference and see when our crack starts appearing and it looks like it's about here. We're going to add a keyframe to the blend of our merge node. We're going to bring it all the way down to 0. Then we're going to go 1 frame over and we're going to bring our blend up to 1. And boom, just like that, we've got our crack. And this is looking pretty good, but to sell it a little bit more, we're going to add in some particles, as if when this cracks, little pieces are kind of flying off of it. So what I've done here, because I don't necessarily need the full puzzle piece shape, all I've done is I've gone and I've taken a couple different polygon nodes, just connected them into each other, and then I've added in a few basic lines right here that trace exactly over top of the cracks that we have. So I've got line 1, line 2, and line 3. And once I've done those, and once I've got these connected into each other, I've simply brought up the border width a little bit so that I'm going to have an area of effect. And this is what they look like when they're all joined together. I've just taken this polygon node here, brought it up into our viewer, and we're going to use our crack area as the area where our particles are coming from, also known as a bitmap. So we're going to add in another P emitter node and a P render node so we can actually see what it is we're doing. And this time, when I go into the controls in my inspector for the P emitter, we're going to go to region and we're going to change the region from all to bitmap. Then I'm going to click and drag our polygon, our third one, into the region bitmap. And now particles are only going to be emitted directly from where our crack is. Then in the style tab, we once again changed our style from point to blob. This time we adjusted our color to a kind of purple, and then we adjusted our red variance to both high and low. So maybe we'll get some particles that are more red and we'll get some that are more blue. We also adjusted our blue variance up quite a bit, all the way to the max, so that we will always have some blue in there no matter how much red we have. Then we made some additional adjustments to our size and our size variance. And because we want our particles to appear very suddenly with the crack, we've actually left our fade in control all the way down, and we've only adjusted our fade out control. Then what we've done is we've looked at our merge node here for our crack, and we've gone a few frames before the crack is actually going to be visible. And that is when we've added our keyframes in to control the number of particles that we're going to emit. And the reason we're doing this is so that visually it's going to look like everything starts shaking, and we'll be able to see the cracks before they actually form based off of the pieces that are coming off, or in this case, the particles. So a few frames before the actual crack takes place, we're going to set our number to 0 and we're going to add a keyframe. Then we're going to go 1 frame over, set our number to 100, add a new keyframe, and then over the next couple frames, we're going to bring that number down to 10, and then we're just going to leave it there. We're also going to bring our lifespan down a little bit, and we're going to increase our lifespan variance just so that all of our particles aren't always disappearing at the same time. Additionally, we are going to add a little bit of velocity and velocity variance, and we are going to change our angle variance all the way up to 360 so that our particles can go in any direction. And if this is a lot to follow along with, don't worry. If you need to, watch this section back once or twice until you get the hang of it. So after we have our particles in our P render, we're going to merge this with a camera 3D so that we can actually see where our particles are. And in our camera 3D, we're going to go into our transform tab, and we are going to pull our camera back until our particle bitmap lines up with the edges of our screen. So if I connect everything to a renderer 3D and I go to here, I'll merge this over top of a black background just so it's a bit easier to view. When I adjust my camera 3D, you can see we are actually changing where our particle bitmap appears. And because I know that my cracks go all the way to the edge of the screen, I only really want to drag this up until my particles are basically just touching the edge here. So for us, that would be a value on our z-axis of 1.66. So then after we have our particle positioning set up, we're going to add a soft glow onto our particles, which is very, very subtle. There's before, there's after, and then we're gonna merge them over top of everything. And now when we play this back, we see our particles appear right before the crack appears. And once we add some camera shake onto this, it's gonna look really, really cool. And that is actually what we're doing next. We're gonna add a little bit more camera shake onto everything now, including our background. Before we were just doing the text, now we're gonna add some more global camera shake. And so there's a few areas where we're gonna wanna add camera shake for some extra impact. The first area is at the beginning. When the 4 first hits the screen, you can see we've got a little bit of camera shake, and then our shake goes away until we begin to approach the spot where we're gonna have the crack. Then our shake picks up again, we get the particles, and boom, there's our crack. And then after the crack, our shake is going to drop back down again to kind of a quiet rumble before it once again picks up very violently for the final shatter, which we have not done yet. So play the whole thing through. We've got initial impact shake, then the uptake for the text comes back down very briefly before picking back up again for our shatter effect. So you can see on our canvas right here, the entire thing is actually pulling away from the edges of our screen. And this is okay because just like in our reference, we are going to put letterboxing on the top and the bottom, and this area right here is not going to be noticed by viewers. So you can see right on the frame before the 4 actually hits the screen, we've got our camera shake node and we've got everything pulled down to 0. Then on the frame where it actually hits, we pull everything up just a little bit before slowly pulling everything back down to 0. Then we continue on all the way past our letters coming in. And then as we approach the crack in the screen and we've got some lightning signifying that we're building energy, our particles come in, our screen shaking more and more and more. So we're starting with a keyframe of everything down here, and then we're slowly building up to this point right here until we have our actual crack. And when we have our crack, you can see we have a big adjustment right here because we want a lot of movement to help sell the impact of the crack. And then we briefly settle down after the initial crack. We pull our X, Y, and rotation deviation all the way down to 0 before we start boosting everything way, way up again for our final actual shatter effect. And when we do the actual shatter effect, what we're going to do is we're going to take our merge right here and we're going to change the blend back down from 1 to 0, because when we do our shatter effect, it's going to have a different pattern from what we have right here. So boom, then our camera shake goes away right here because at this point, everything is in pieces and all the pieces are moving forwards towards the screen, just like they are in our viewer here. So let's create our shatter effect, shall we? So we're gonna take our camera shake and we're going to plug it into an image plane 3D, which I don't think I need to say it at this point. Shift spacebar, image plane 3D, plug it right in. And what this is going to do is it's going to take our 2D piece of media and it's going to put it into 3D space. Then we're going to add in a replicate 3D and we're going to add in one more image plane 3D. And the way these are going to interact with each other is very, very important. Now, what we're going to do in our first image plane 3D is we're going to bring our subdivisions all the way down to 1, so that we have a single piece of geometry for our image plane. Then we're gonna go to our second image plane 3D and we're gonna go to our subdivisions. Now, for this part, you can adjust your subdivisions to whatever number you would like. For us, we're gonna do 5. And this control right here is going to help us limit the amount of pieces that we're gonna break everything into. And whatever number you set this to is the number you are going to divide the size of this image plane by. So if I have 5 subdivisions here, I'm gonna go to this image plane right here. We're gonna go into the transform settings, and normally the scale of an image plane is set to 1. And 1 divided by 5 is 0.2. And so we've got 5 here, so we're going to do 1 divided by 5, and that gives us 0.2. Now, the reason this is important is because when we plug both of our image planes into our Replicate 3D, and it's important that you make sure that your subdivision's image plane goes into the background of your Replicate 3D and not the other way around. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Then when we take our Replicate 3D, this is what you should see. And so what we've done here is we've taken our image plane and we've broken it into a whole bunch of little pieces. Then we're going to take our Replicate 3D and we are going to plug that into a UV map 3D. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change our UV map orientation to Z, and we're going to click on Fit and Center. If you don't do that, you're probably going to notice that your UV map is looking a little bit weird. Normally, I think it's set to Y, which ends up stretching your image along the Y axis instead of showing it to us on the Z axis. So now with our UV map set up, we are going to plug it right into a Displace 3D. And the Displace 3D is what we are going to be using to create the different sized pieces of our shatter effect. Now, in order to create the warp information for our Displace effect, what we're going to do is take a gray background. We're going to plug that into the background input of a merge node. And then we're going to take a fast noise node. We're going to increase our detail, bring down our brightness, and then we're going to increase our scale just a little bit. Then in the color page, we're going to increase our red and green all the way to give us this yellow color here. Then when you merge the two over top of each other, this is what you should end up with. Last but not least, we're going to add a rectangle mask over top of our fast noise, and we're going to bring the border width down a whole bunch. And the reason we're doing this is because this fast noise is going to act as our shatter data. And if we let it touch the edges of our frame, we're going to end up with a little bit of a warped image. Let me show you what I mean right here. So now you can see how our warp data is affecting our image plane 3D. As soon as we connect our rectangle, we're still warping the inside, but the outside is left nice and pristine. And then in our Displace 3D, we're changing our channel to RGB. We're going to change the mode to relative. Then we're going to bring down the scale so that we're not warping it beyond recognition. And we're going to bring the bias down as well to -5. Then we're going to take a copy of our UV map 3D and we're going to hit Control-Shift-V to paste an instance of our UV map. And what you should see is your image go back to normal instead of being warped. Then we're going to plug the entire thing into a Transform 3D. In case we need to make any kind of adjustments, then we're going to attach that to a Merge 3D with a Camera 3D. And then we're going to go into a Renderer 3D. And we're going to make sure we adjust our camera 3D so that we can fully see our fusion composition. So here's normally what it's going to look like. And the reason it's going to look like that is because our camera is inside of our Merge 3D. So what we want to do is increase the value of our Z translation. That's going to move our camera along our Z axis and bring our image into focus. So then back in our Replicate 3D, this is where we're actually going to create the shatter effect. When our title text actually shatters in our reference, we're going to be making adjustments to the translation and the jitter controls in our Replicate 3D. And that is how we're going to move all of the pieces of our own fusion composition to get the same kind of shatter effect and movement that we have in our reference video. So what we're going to do is right at the moment of the shatter, we're going to add keyframes on our translation and on our translation jitter and rotation jitter. Then what we ended up doing is moving to a frame where everything was relatively close. And the next step was to make sure that we didn't have too many pieces in the frame and we didn't have anything kind of completely covering the camera. So we can see we've got these two pieces right here. We can see we've got a piece on the top. So everything looks about how we want. And if you want to actually check to see what your composition looks like in 2D space, you can always take your Renderer 3D node and you can throw that up into your viewer. So then for the last few frames of our animation, we added a few more keyframes on our translation and rotation jitter, just so that we could control the movement of our shattered pieces a little bit easier, so that they move a little bit more like they do in our reference. Now, we also used an effect that I only recommend using if you have a bit of a beefier PC, and that would be accumulation effects. Now, accumulation effects is how we're going to create depth of field blur, so that the closer or further away something gets to the area we're actually focusing on, the blurrier it's going to get. And when we have our accumulation effects toggled on, we can also enable depth of field. We can change the amount of depth of field blur that we have, and we can also play around with the quality. Now, the higher quality you put in your accumulation effects, the better the quality will be, obviously, but it will be at a heavy cost for your PC. So I would not recommend using accumulation effects until you are going to render something out. And if you are planning on taking a look at them in the Fusion page, just know it is going to take a while to load, which is also why we don't currently have our renderer 3D in our viewer. And one of the other settings we are going to change with this renderer 3D node is changing our renderer type from software to hardware. And the reason we're doing that is that sometimes with the software renderer, when it comes to rendering out the geometry and with some lighting effects of 3D objects, sometimes you'll end up with some weird kind of glitches and effects. So with our accumulation effects set up, I'm going to go into our camera 3D, and I'm going to go into the controls tab. Now you can see we have a tab down here called control visibility. And this is where we're going to enable our focal plane right here. And the focal plane, which is this green panel, is where we are actually focusing. So anything that is right on this focal plane is going to be completely in focus. Anything that is closer or further away from it is going to be blurry. And we can actually adjust where our focal plane is by adjusting this slider right here. Here I have us hooked up to a separate renderer 3D node minus the accumulation effects. And you'll see that when we have our shatter effect, this is what we end up with. And you can see that the actual shattering pieces have a completely different pattern than the crack. And that is why we actually turn off the crack over here using our merge node right on this frame right here. Once everything shatters, because we don't want that crack kind of just appearing all over the place. Boom, just like that. And then using our replicate 3D, that's how we're moving the pieces slowly off camera. Then to make sure that we are keeping the same kind of widescreen style that the trailer has, we have a simple rectangle mask right here. I'm going to turn this on, and if I connect this to our renderer 3D node, you can see that when our text and our entire frame shatters, now it is cut off by the same kind of border that we have in our reference. Now, in order to give this effect a little bit more oomph when we have the shatter, what we're going to do is add on two glow nodes. One is going to be a regular glow and one is going to be a soft glow. And these are both going to react to when we have our actual shatter effect. And all that we've done is keyframe our gain on our soft glow and our glow on our normal glow. And we've just bumped them up a little bit for one frame before slowly bringing them back down just on the impact of that shatter effect, just to give it a little bit more oomph. And then we've also connected our rectangle mask to the glow and soft glow because we do want to cut off where it shows right here. And of course, our shatter effect would not be complete without having some shatter particles as well. And so the way we did our shatter particles is by now something you've seen a few times, P emitter node connected to a P render. And instead of having our region set to all or set to bitmap, we actually changed our region and set it to sphere. So here is where our particles are coming from. We also gave it a little bit of a Y offset just so it would not be directly on top of our camera. Otherwise it would end up right there, which we obviously do not want. So then in our style, of course, you know, we're going to change to blob. We actually set the color to be blue because that is the most prominent color that we have for our shatter particles in our reference. Then all we did is we made sure to keep our blue variance super, super high and then add in a little bit of red variance so that for a couple of our particles like this one or like that one, we might have a tiny bit of purple in there. Then we adjusted our size controls along with our size variance. And because once again, we're not worried about the fade in, only the fade out of our particles, we haven't touched the fade in at all, only the fade out. Then in the actual controls, because we only need particles when we have the actual shatter effect take place, we have one keyframe set to 0 on our number right before the shatter effect takes place. And then on the actual shatter effect, we're immediately bumping that number up to 10 and letting it carry on for a few frames. So every frame, it's going to generate 10 particles before finally turning it off. And then we've got our lifespan set to 125 with a variance of 50. And this time we're bringing our velocity all the way up because we want these particles moving fast with our shattered pieces here. So you can see we have our particles spawning from our sphere and they're moving very fast towards the camera, just like that. We have a tiny bit of velocity variance so that some of the particles can be spaced out. They're not all going to be moving at the same speed. And then for our angle, we're going to add a little bit of angle variance, which will change the Y range of our particles. So our particles can go both up and down. And then for our Z angle, this is going to change the actual direction that our particles are moving. And we're going to add on a little bit of Z angle variance so that our particles are moving in the general direction of our camera, but they're not moving in a straight line, and they're also not moving, directly away or sideways from the camera. Then we're going to plug all that into a renderer 3D, and this is what it ends up looking like. After that, we're going to throw a glow on top of our particles. We're going to adjust our settings just a little bit, and then we're going to add a soft glow on there as well. Last but not least, we're going to blur our particles a little bit so that we don't have this kind of harsh bloom effect that you see here. So there we've blurred our particles. And then when we merge that together with everything else, we end up with this really nice shatter effect with our particles moving closer from behind. All that's left is to set up our final background and our final bit of text right here. And the way we're doing our background is very similar to the way we set up our first one. We're using a simple fast noise node. We're going to bring our seed rate up a little bit along with our scale, contrast, and detail. And then in terms of the color, we're switching from 2-color to gradient, so we get a little bit more control over the color. And we're going to have a little bit of this opaque blue, and then we're going to have a completely transparent black. And that is what is giving us this right here. We're going to merge that underneath of a we're going to merge that underneath this little bit more vibrant blue fast noise, which we've also changed the noise settings of. Then in the color page, you can see this one's also a gradient. And on our left side here, we just have this vibrant blue. On the right side, we've got another black, but we haven't made it completely transparent. We've only brought the opacity down just a little bit. When we merge these over top of each other, we get our light and our dark. So we end up with a nice little bit of variance between the two. We're going to merge both of these over top of a black background, and that gives us this really nice dark textured blue background. Last but not least, we're going to use the same technique that we used before, which is taking a very harshly contrasted black and white background. This one's just going to be our simple 2-color, but with our white alpha brought all the way down, and we're going to merge that on top of our blue background with the blend brought almost all the way down. There's our before, there's our after, and this helps to add just a tiny bit more texture before finally we add on our film grain, which looks like this. There's before and there is after. And so that is how we do our background. Then, so that we can actually get the same letterboxing that we have in our reference, we're going to take all of this and we're going to put it into the foreground input of a merge node. And this is going on top of just a basic black background. And we're going to take our letterboxing here, right, our rectangle mask, and we're going to plug that into the mask input of our merge. And that is what is going to cut off our blue background and give us this nice letterboxing effect. And then in order to create our final date text, we've got our main text right here, and we've set this up in the same way that we've done the Sonic text. We're using the same Rebelton bold font. We've adjusted our size and our tracking to be similar, and we've got our shading tabs 1 and 2 set up in the same way. One of the main differences is that we're pulling the size for our X down, and we are actually leaving our shear at a negative 0.2 instead of a negative 3 on both our first and second shading element. Then what we're doing is we're taking our text here, we're going to plug that into a soft glow, both with the background and the mask input, and that's going to give us this right here. And we've done some very basic adjustments. We're going to plug that into one more soft glow to give us a little bit of an aura around our text. After that, it goes directly into a color corrector node where you can see we've pulled it to blue and we've pulled our gamma down a bit. We're going to plug that one into our glow node to give it just a little bit more oomph. There's a before, there's our after, and we've turned off the red and the alpha to make sure we're only getting our cooler colors in there. And then we're taking a copy of our main text, we're pasting it right in here. And obviously we are going to disable the shading element 1 and merge it on top of our blue text. So now this is what we have. Then with another lane, we're going to connect our main text into another glow node. And this is with our red and alpha turned off. We've got a little bit of an adjustment to our glow. We're going to plug that into a soft glow, and that is also going to go into another color corrector. We're going to merge this underneath of everything else. There's a before, there's our after, and this is just to give us a little bit more of an initial glow around our letters. Then we used our transform node to make a very, very basic adjustment to our size and position. And just like that, we have our March text. Next, we created our 2027 text. And the way we did it is just as straightforward. With this one, we're taking our text, we're only using shading element 2. We've made some adjustments to our size and tracking. For this one, we've got our X size down to 0.9. Our shear is once again at -0.2. And then we've got a couple different soft glows lined up right here. We plug them into our color corrector and we pull our color over along with pumping our saturation. So there's our layer 1. Let's look at our second lane. We've got another soft glow. We've got our color corrector, and then we've got one more glow on top of that. When we merge these two together, this is what we end up with. We're going to take that, plug it into another soft glow, but this time we're going into both the background and mask input to give it a little bit more of that source glow. We're adding one more soft glow to give it a little bit more aura or a little bit more glow around our text. And then we're going to add on our transform node for the general sizing. Then when we merge these two together, boom, this is what we end up with. Last but not least, we've got our in theaters text right here. We've got this set up with both a shading element 1 and 2, just to give it a little bit more of a bubbly feel. Our shear is going to be at -0.2, and our Y size we've brought down just a little bit. And we're just merging it right on top of our other two pieces of text. And there we go. We've got our in theaters text. Last but not least, we're going to plug all of these into a transform node so that when we begin our shatter effect, we're slowly going to have the same kind of grow effect that our reference has. So then when we're merging all of this together, our date text is going to be merged underneath of our shatter particles because we want our shatter particles on top. Both of those are going to be merged on top of our date background because we want both of these to be on top of our fast noise nodes. And both of these merge nodes here are going to be connected to our rectangle mask so that we have the letterbox on top of everything. Then all of these are going to be merged underneath our entire composition so far so that when we have our shatter effect, this is what's found underneath. And bada bing, bada boom, you have yourself a Sonic trailer. Thank you everyone so much for watching this video. It was an absolute blast to make. If you want the project files, they are going to be available for free, linked in the description below. We have a whole bunch of other stuff available on the Fourth Wall page, both free and paid. Check out some of the other videos. We've got tutorials on text animation and a whole bunch of other FX breakdowns. My name is Isaiah Grade, and I'll see you in the next video.